Hello, everyone. Welcome once again. I'm Associate Professor Chrissy Fediara of the Griffith University School of Medicine in the Gold Coast, Australia. I'm also the president and founder of the OCI Foundation, which is an NGO based in Nigeria and in Australia. This presentation is on the ArOY Youth Health Campaign, which is an OCI Foundation's initiative for Nigerian youths against breast and cervical cancer. It is one of the series of our lessons to help prepare monitors that will help in the implementation of this ArOY Youth Health Campaign. So this module 2 of this course looks at the monitoring techniques and approaches that will be very helpful in making sure that the program is well implemented and well run. A bit of an outline of what we're going to look at today. First, we're going to look at the monitoring team. What makes up the monitoring team, the composition that's expected for each state. Then the monitoring strategy. So we have about 6 strategies we're going to run through. So we're going to go through every single one of them. Then this presentation will end with trial quizzes, which helps to make sure that we are all engaged with this program. And to get a certificate for this program, the quizzes are compulsory. I'll have to say that this presentation comes before a text presentation itself. So you can either watch the video or look at the text. You can do both if you like, but one or the other should suffice. Now we have an acknowledgement to make. We give special thanks to Mrs. Sabine Andigwe and Mrs. Yukeria Elike. Now, these 2 ladies were the desk officers for the ArOY Youth Health Campaign when it was rolled out in Anambra State. And they were very, very efficient in getting their programs done, and they helped put this template together. So all thanks go to them for what you are seeing today. Now, let's look at the monitoring team, the composition for each. As we know, the program is being implemented across every single state in Nigeria. Now, each state will have its own monitoring team as this program runs through the senior secondary schools in each state. Now, the team is supposed to have 1 leader. All right. Each state will have 1 leader, and this leader can be a staff of the Ministry of Education or a nominated staff from the National Orientation Agency in that state. Now, as you know, we are in partnerships with National Orientation Agency at the federal level, and each state will be co-opted to be part of this monitoring program. But the leader can be from any of the institutions, the the State Ministry of Education in that state, or the National Orientation Agency in that state. There will also be 1 desk officer in addition to the leader. However, this desk officer will liaise with the monitoring team, between the monitoring team and the OCI Foundation. So the person will be like a go-between, rallying around what's happening at the state level, and also coordinating and letting the OCI Foundation into giving an insight into what's happening. Now, this staff must be a staff of the Federal Ministry of Education, unlike the leader. And if this is the case, then this desk officer can also be the leader. So, if the desk officer happens to, be there from the Ministry of Education, then it can also be a leader. But we can also have a desk officer from the Ministry of Education and the leader from the NOA. It depends. It's flexible at that level. But if the desk officer from the Ministry of Education likes, he or she can be the leader in that state. But we can have a desk officer in case the Ministry of Education is too busy, then we have a leader from the National Orientation Agency. This is very important. Now, in addition to the desk officer and the leader, as the case may be, each state will equally have a member from the educational units. So now this educational unit, I need to explain, depends on the structure in each state. In Anambra State, there are 6 educational units called the zones, educational zones. In a few other states we've been to realize that such units do not exist, but we need a form of educational unit that will help. Now, as I already said, it could be from the educational zones. In Anambra, there were 6. Depending on the state, we'll have 1 from each zone. If such a system doesn't exist, we can use the senatorial districts. I'm aware that each state in Nigeria has 3 senatorial districts. So we can have a member from each of those districts from the Ministry of Education in those units or in those senatorial zones join this monitoring group. If that's not the case, then we can have a member from each local government there. So what the member does is to liaise between the monitoring team and the schools in that local government, or the schools in the senatorial district, or the schools in the educational zone, as the case may be. Now, each state's joint planning committee will work out what suits more. So for those who have been part of this program know, there's a joint planning committee for each state made up of members of the OCI Foundation, members of the Ministry of Education and Health, and members of the First Ladies group, if we are working with the First Lady. And the aim is to work with the First Lady of every state. So most First Ladies have their NGOs. They normally nominate people that will join this committee along with the OCI Foundation and the ministries involved. So they form the planning committee, and we expect them to decide and advise us what educational structures are on the ground in each state. Now we expect this monitoring group to form a WhatsApp group. So we recommend this for them. Each state will form their own. Now the strategies, so what are the monitoring strategies? So we now looked at the themes of what makes them up. So how do they do their job? What strategies do they adopt? First, they have to get approval from the Ministry of Education. Now, that approval is to allow the inclusion of breast and cervical cancer teachings into the curriculum of senior secondary schools in their states. Now, normally this would have been done at the onset. The Joint Planning Committee would normally have been able to obtain this approval. However, that will be ahead of every launching of this program in every state. However, the leader of this monitoring group in each state should check with the State Ministry of Education to be sure that this has been done. We do not just take it for granted. The second monitoring strategy is to ensure that the topics are added in the scheme of work. So this is not the whole idea of this ArOY campaign, is to make sure that this goes into the scheme of work and stays in the scheme of work and becomes self-sustainable. So it's not something that we just want to teach, and then when the teacher goes away, or when this program, maybe OCF Foundation is not there, or the first lady leaves, or the mid-commissioner leaves, the program collapses. No, we do not want that. All we want is to put it in the curriculum. It stays in the scheme of work forever. And this will be for the first, second, and third terms at the convenient weeks. So for SS1 in every state, we have this not just in the first term, but also in the second term of that SS1 and in the third term of that SS1. At the convenient weeks, we look at the convenient weeks later. And then we want this to be repeated as they go through SS2 and SS3. So it will be in the curriculum in first term SS1, first term SS2, first term SS1, second term SS1, third term SS1, and then first term SS2, second term SS2, third term SS2, and then first term SS3, second term SS3, and third term SS3. So this is very important because, for every cohort, every group that goes through SS1, we repeat this in their third term, second term, and as they go to SS2, it will also be repeated across the 3 terms, and also repeated across the 3 terms in SS3. You'll be wondering why. I'll tell you why in a minute. Now, first of all, these teachings, we expect it to be at convenient weeks, and we are looking at before the midterm test for each term. So we know that every term is a midterm test. We want this to be done before the midterm tests. Very important for us. For example, let's look at Anambra as an example. What they currently have is 3rd week, they teach breast cancer teachings. And in the 4th week, they teach cervical cancer teachings. Now, both 2 weeks come before the midterm tests. And then, one teaching period is reserved each week. So in 3rd week, we just have one teaching of 45 minutes for breast cancer. And in the 4th week, another 45 minutes for cervical cancer. Very important. So we don't do the lessons together on the same day. 45 minutes is reserved for each of them. Breast cancer, 45 minutes in week 3. Cervical cancer, 45 minutes in week 4. A total of 90 minutes across the 2 weeks. Each teaching must cover all aspects of breast and cervical cancers, respectively. So the role of the monitoring team is to make sure that these things are included in the curriculum in SS1, in SS2, in SS3, across the 3 terms for each, in weeks 3 and 4, to make sure they are separated in the weeks and coming before the midterm test, and at the appropriate time are allocated for this. And then that the teachings cover all aspects of breast and cervical cancer. These are very important. And that the teachers, just note, as monitors, the teachers have been trained to do this. So our job as monitors is to make sure that they actually do them. So the only monitoring team only just needs to ensure compliance. Strategy 3. That will be to ensure there's a meeting with stakeholders, whether it's physical face-to-face meeting, a Zoom meeting, or WhatsApp meeting. Usually physical meeting or WhatsApp meeting should be fine. Now, who are the stakeholders, one might ask? There are quite a number of people that make up the stakeholder list. The first will be the representatives of the First Lady. The First Lady's NGO in every state, or any partnering body the OCI Foundation is partnering with to implement it in each state. So they will nominate 1 or 2 people in the stakeholder group for the monitoring team. So remember, this stakeholder team is different from the monitoring team. But what the monitoring team needs to do for us is to make sure they arrange a meeting of these stakeholders, which involves them and gives them update as to what's happening. In addition to this, the other stakeholders are the OCI Foundation's representatives at each state. Now, we may not have boots on ground in every state, we will have our members join the WhatsApp group in every state. Desk officer from the Ministry of Education. So remember how we talked about the desk officer from the Ministry of Education. Now, if such is not there, then a representative from that Ministry of Education must be in the stakeholder meeting. Then the National Orientation Agency monitoring team. So there must be people from there in the monitoring team. So they will equally be among the stakeholders for this meeting. Then representatives of the educational zones or senatorial zones or local government. Remember how we described this, that every state should have an educational unit. A state like Anambra has educational zones already, which make up this educational unit, but it could be in the senatorial districts or local government areas, as we've already described. At least one member from those zones or units must be in the stakeholder meeting. This is very important so that we make sure that communication disseminates very well, that our information disseminates very well. And the school principals for all the participating senior secondary schools in each state must be in this group. So this is very important. Okay, because we want the school principals that actually are our kind of eyes and ears in the schools are part of the stakeholder meeting. Remember, this is different from the monitoring group. This is a meeting that we'll call every now and then to make sure that every stakeholder knows what's happening. In addition to that, all participating civic education teachers will equally be part of the stakeholders here because they are the ones that actually do the teachings. So I'm thinking a WhatsApp group should be fine. A Zoom meeting, yeah, but WhatsApp is easier, I would think. Then all participating guidance and counselors. So in some schools, there may be no civic education teachers. In such schools, the guidance and counseling teachers, can join in place of the civic education teachers. And that's why we added where applicable. Now, what do the stakeholders meeting do? What do they hope to achieve? So we intend that they will plan and agree on a number of things. One is the expectations from the teachers. What's expected from the teachers? Expectations from the monitors themselves. What is expected from the monitors to make sure that they all understand, and then ensure that all parties agree to the monitoring plan. The schedules of these plans, the frequency, the feedback, the criteria. These are very important. And then agree on disputes. So every now and then there will be disputes. There may be issues that come up between the teachers, with the principals, with the monitoring group. The stakeholders should step in and arrange for a resolution to these problems. Now, strategy 4, actual monitoring and engagement. What exactly happens with this monitoring? The concerned teachers, the civic education teachers should, the monitoring team should ensure that they submit soft or hard copies of their schemes of work. So there should be a system in place to make sure that happens. Now, submit their lesson notes to ensure that they complied with the teachings. Very important. And then the above should be submitted every time to the monitoring team. Okay, every time is fine. Doesn't have to be every day or every week. The head of the monitoring team, MT, the monitoring team at the local government or senatorial or educational zone will receive this and then ultimately send it to the state leader that we've described before, either in the Educational Ministry or the National Orientation Agency, and from there to the OCI Foundation. So the state leader will hold it and submit to the OCI Foundation on an annual basis, so every year. So even though he gets them every time, they send it to the OCI Foundation every year. It could be more frequently if they like. All the above ensures compliance. In addition, the monitoring team will need to undergo further checks on a number of things, including the teachers' records of work, including the students' exercise books every now and then to ensure that teachings have been done and to ensure. So they also look at the question pool. Every school will have a question pool where they draw the questions for their assessments. It's the job of the monitoring team to ensure that these question pools are there and that they use it. Strategy 5, the monitoring team should do a number of other things. They should liaise with the Education Quality Assurance Department. So I expect most states to have an Education Quality Quality Assurance Department. This monitoring team should liaise with them. Usually in most schools, they go for supervisions anyway, even without the ArOY Youth Health campaign. So they should liaise with them to ensure that they regularly help them assess the topics in both the diary and lesson notes. So our monitors does not have to, just go there on their own. They'll work with the Ministry of Education supervision teams or the Quality Assurance Department to get this done. And then, of course, look at the notes of the civic education teachers. Well, the World Cancer Day, this is optional, not compulsory, but we recommend that the monitoring team should help ensure that the World Cancer Day is observed. It's usually February 4th every year. There may be talks or sensitization activities. The students can give their talks themselves. And then the monitoring team and zonal officers should also regularly visit schools, maybe every year. And in those visits, they should interview the students and the teachers to, get their views on the implementation and make sure it's all being done. Now, copies of the test items from the midterm test and exam, so copies of the test questions that were asked during the exams. to make sure that they contain the questions. And then this should be submitted to the monitoring team at the end of every term, along with the time they get the reports or the visitings. And they must include breast and cervical cancer as topics for discussion. So if there are any gathering of students and staff, the monitoring team can encourage them to discuss breast and cervical cancer topics. So monitoring 6, so this is the final one. We encourage the whole regular meetings among themselves. It could be quarterly or 6 months. Now, this is different from the stakeholder meeting. They should just, WhatsApp group is enough. They can just communicate among themselves. It could be physical or online or WhatsApp. It might also include the OCI Foundation. This is not compulsory. Now, every now and then, the OCI Foundation will want to run a research to evaluate what we're doing. We expect the monitoring team to assist with that as well. It wouldn't be in every state, but we'll discuss that as the time comes. Now, funding for these monitoring teams, we expect this to be minimal. We don't have a lot of money to spend on monitoring, but we don't expect much money to be needed anyway, because we intend to use existing staff in the ministries of education or the National Orientation Agency. So they're already there, they're already being paid. This is just an extra, one or two things they can do. However, they can work with the respective states on a case-by-case basis for funding, possibly the State Ministry of Education. This can be discussed at the planning level. So if they need funding, it can be discussed at the Joint Planning Committee level. It could just be money for like filling their cars to do the monitoring. But that's why it's important, wherever possible, to make sure that this is done in a sustainable way. And they could prepare annual budgets where the Ministry of Education can look into and make sure that these are done. Or they can use existing budgets already with the Ministry of Education or the National Orientation Agency. In Anambra, the OCI Foundation provided 10,000 every month, but we cannot possibly, in a sustainable way, do it for every state. But we did it as first state, but every state can afford 10K every month to get this done. Now, this is the end. Thank you very much for listening to this program. Please let us all join hands to arm our youths. We can do this while they are young. We can do this for every single youth in Nigeria. And I suggest we do this right now. Let's do this for our families, for our states, and for our country. Thank you very much.